All right, y'all. So I thought I would record a quick tutorial on how to export your textures, get them into Maya, and then render those out and assemble those back in Premiere and get a little video clip like this. So it's gonna be nice, and I'm gonna try to keep it fast. So just go over the steps as I do them. All right. So first step, you're gonna have a 3D mesh that's being triangulated in Substance Painter, right? So it does its own triangulation algorithm. So what we need to do is export that resulting mesh that it made. So first go to File, Export Mesh, and then make sure Apply Triangulation is clicked, and then do Export, and then navigate to wherever you're going to place that, right? Um, and I always append triangulated to the end of that file name, so I know exactly what that is, right? All right, so now go over to Maya, and this is my little scene that I set up, and I'm just going to hide all my lights. I'm going to hide my plane, and it's basically a camera with that same triangulated object exported, right? And it has the material applied to it, right? So once you go to File, Import, and bring in that triangulated mesh, select all the mesh objects. Make sure you're in object mode and just drag select in your scene, and it should select everything in there. The next step is you're going to want to go to hold right click and do assign new material and give it a new Arnold standard surface shader, right? And essentially we need to plug in all of our textures that we're going to get out of Substance Painter into these channels. Not every single one. We're just going to be going for color. We're going to be going for metalness. We're going to be going for roughness. And down further, we're going to be going for bump mapping in the geometry tab, right? So let's get some textures exported. I'm going to go to File, Export Textures. And it's important that you specify which output template. Right now it's set for a games engine right now. So we want to switch that over to, let's do Arnold AI Standard. If you don't have one, try to find one that says Arnold, or like maybe Maya or something, basically it's going to flip your normal map to be readable by Arnold correctly. And then, yeah, make sure you have one shader in here. If you have multiple, like if you assign a different material to your head before importing that into that's fine. You'll just be getting out these textures for each different shader. And then back in Maya, you'll need to apply that shader to that part of the model again and link up these textures in that material specifically, right? So, and if you go over to your output templates, you can see exactly what it's going to be outputting. Let's find Arnold AI Standard Surface. We're going to get our base color or our albedo map. We're going to get a metalness. We're going to get a roughness map. And we're going to get a normal map. And you can see exactly which channels of it, of that resulting texture it's plugging into, right? So that normal map's plugging into the RGB and the alpha, and then the emissive is doing that as well. We're not going to be plugging in the emissive because I didn't have an emissive material on here. We're not going to be plugging in the height either. That's if you're doing some displacement stuff. But yeah, so I'm basically just going to be plugging in base color, metalness, and roughness, and normal. So let's go back to our settings. Let's go to click on global settings and specify where you want that to appear, right? So I'm going to put this on my desktop somewhere, right? Let's do, sure, in mesh demo, let's make a new folder. I'm going to call this materials. Put this in your Maya project folder under source images, preferably. I'm just not going to set that up right now. And I'm going to select folder, AI standard surface file type, PNG is fantastic. And then click export. Boom, we have our textures out right there, successfully exported, it says. Fantastic. And then here, we need to do some cool material stuff, right? So I'm going to select that object. I'm going to hold right click. I'm going to go to material attributes. Boom. And it's going to bring me to the shader that I've applied to it, right? So I'm going to rename this to be sword render matte, right? So sword render matte. And remember, it's an AI standard surface. That's exactly what we're going to go for. And remember, it's under the Arnold tab right here. That's how you find that. And let's start plugging in our channels, right? So make sure your weight is all the way up to 1. You don't want to make that 0. It's going to just turn, like, see how it's just making it black, right? So any image that you plug into there, it's just going to reduce it by this multiplier. But yes, yeah, so let's plug in a color. Boom. I'm going to click that little checkerboard box right there. I'm going to click File. I'm going to go to Image Name, and I'm going to click the little folder icon, and I'm going to navigate to that folder. Let's see, Mesh Demo, Materials, Base Color. And there you go. That's the texture that we exported from Substance Painter. It looks fantastic to me. I'm loving it. And down here, Color Space, it automatically assigns it to sRGB, which basically different programs handle color differently. So you have to export the proper format from Substance, and you have to import it as such, right? So sRGB is perfect for a color texture like that. Let's go click this button to go back to the material and start plugging in other textures, right? So you can already see if you press 6 in your viewport, like this is 5, you press 6, you can see that diffuse material on the sword. Very cool, very cool. Next up, we got to plug in metalness. I'm going to click this checkerboard box, boom. I'm going to go to the file, and I'm going to go to, let's see, let's find that one again, Mesh Demo, Materials. Pretty easy, metalness, perfect, that's what we're looking for. And you can see the values, like you can see which parts of it are not metallic because of this. And that's great. One thing to note is that you want to plug this in as color space raw, because it's not an actual colored image, right? We're not looking for color accuracy on there. We're looking for value accuracy because it's a metallic map, meaning that it goes from 0 to 1, and we want to make sure that those values are as correct as possible when it plugs into the shader, right? Okay, so let's go back to the main shader, boom, and then we're going to go to roughness. Under the specular, don't plug anything into diffuse roughness. If you accidentally did, right-click this and right-click it and do break connection if you plugged anything into one of these wrong channels, right? So make sure you're keeping an eye out for that. But yeah, let's plug into roughness now. Boom. File. Folder. Navigate to it. And I'm looking for, Mesh Demo, Materials, Roughness. Perfect, and you can see all the different roughness that I have on that sword, right? So the white materials means that it's pretty rough. The black materials means that it's, you know, it's going to be shiny, right? And then color space, let's do raw. Perfect. All right. So you'll notice that when we have most of them hooked up, we have to do geometry still. So let's plug into bump mapping real quick. And be careful. You want to do use as tangent space normals, and it doesn't quite matter because we're going to reorganize some stuff in a little bit. But yeah, so make sure tangent space normals for most textures, or for most normal maps in Maya. Bump value, click that, and then we're going to plug in our normal map texture in here. So, sorry, that's course materials. Let's do mesh demo. Normal, perfect, and then color space, you want that to be raw. Boom, and you can see that that is now accurate on that boulder. If we see any other inaccuracy, we might override this channel and plug in some different stuff, right? So now we need to set up our render, right? So I'm going to close that because that's a little bit of a spoiler for what's coming up. Go to Arnold and open Arnold Render View. And you'll see that I have like another render from like a previous setting, right? What we want to do is you can press play to start your render, but if you don't have a light in your scene, it's not going to render out anything, right? So let's go to lights, and you can play around with a lot of these. I'm going to use area lights. You can use sky dome lights, and you can use physical sky pretty well. The other ones are a little bit less performant, right? They're a little bit less performant, like meaning that it'll take a longer time to render out some of the other lights. So I'm just gonna make a area light, standard area light, and then I'm gonna move it around. I'm gonna scale it up, and then I'm going to position it just pointing at that sword, and let's see what it looks like when we press play, right? And it's loading those textures. Looks like nothing. What's going on there? So essentially that light that we have positioned there is too weak. We need to increase its intensity and exposure. More importantly, the exposure. I always like crank that up to 10, and then let's see if it starts rendering out anything. Nope, looks like it's still not strong enough. Boom. Okay, so I can start cranking on that, and then it will finally start making that happen. So now you'll notice that, one, I don't have anything that this is resting on. So feel free to make like a disk and just scale it up. You can even type in the channel box like 1,000,000 in size, and boom, it's like huge. And so now we have it at least resting on something. You could also import like some model environment that you either made or downloaded. I'm fine with that. But you'll notice that my textures are looking a little bit weird. Like it doesn't really look shiny, right? So if I zoom in on this, it looks kind of matte, as though it were just that regular, like almost like a Lambert material, like just that very basic sort of material. So let's go check out the rendering editors, Hypershade. Boom. So pop that open. And you can see some other materials I was messing around with. Sword Render Matte. That's the one that we're using for this sword. So click that and then click this button to expose all of the channels connected to that, right? Boom. So there we go. We have our base color. Color space is sRGB. That's perfect. We have our metallic, but notice that it defaults to plugging in the alpha, right? So if you want to use that alpha, you can use alpha as luminance, but you can also plug in R, G, or B, because it's a grayscale texture. It's using that on all the channels, so I'm going to plug that in. Notice that our render updated because we changed the shader, so it needs to recalculate that. So I'm going to plug in roughness as well, right? I'm going to plug in roughness as well. Again, make sure that they're set to color space raw. And then look at that. See that? You see that reflectiveness? You see that reflection that's in there now? It's like really, it's really shiny. Probably a little bit too shiny. I might go back into back into Substance Painter and kind of recalculate that. But you can also change those values in here as well, in the node itself. But I'm also noticing that I have some weird shading on that normal map. And I find that sometimes it works better if I press tab and type in AI normal in this little field right here. And this is going to be Arnold's normal map. And notice that for this, it takes in the alpha of the normal, but we're going to give it all 3 channels of the normal into this node. Boom, right there. And let's plug that into the normal camera. And you can see that it's actually it's modified now, right? It's a little bit more accurate in terms of like the surface, right? That looks a lot closer to my Substance Painter scene in terms of the normal map, right? That looks a lot more accurate. So let's use that. I find that to be more useful. Also, you'll notice that like it looks different. Now, every render is going to be a little bit different in how it functions. But the problem with that is that we're not using, like if you look back into Substance Painter, it's actually lighting this with an AI, or not an AI, but basically a skybox light. So if you go to Arnold, light, Skydome light right here, you can create one of those, and boom, the default one's just white. And look at that. So that's looking a lot closer to our Substance Painter file. But if you look at the attributes on that Skydome light, you can see that it has a color channel exposed in there. So you can plug in any HDRI sky that you want into that, and it's going to render out nicely. It's going to be more similar to Painter. If you want to use other lights, then feel free, right? So I'm not gonna plug that in. I'm gonna instead use a light. I'm gonna use a physical sky. And that physical sky has, a lot of other parameters that we can play around with in here, right? So I'm gonna bump up the intensity a little bit. And I kind of like the angle of that. It's looking cool. You can also use area lights to create that sort of almost like a photography stage sort of aesthetic. That's completely fine by me. But yeah, feel free to play around with all of these different attributes in here and just have fun experimenting with lighting. Like if you're really into this, like that. This is an entire job of someone that would be on a production, right? Like this was what they would do day in, day out. It's just light scenes and make them look real pretty, you know. So if that resonates with you, then go for it, right? So once you have your lights in your scene, make sure on all those lights. So let's open up our outliner. You'll see some other older lights that I'm using, but if you click on that, you'll notice that you have the AI Skydome light shape, and you'll get a lot of fuzziness in your render, right? So let's talk about fighting that fuzziness. Let's talk about fighting that fuzziness, and then we'll talk about creating the animation for the render. So let's go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, right? Render Settings, make sure your image format is PNG, and we're going to make this an animation, right? So frame animation, make sure that says name number.ext. That way we can really easily import the images into our video editing software, and it'll be just fine. Next up, we're going to specify our start and end frame to, I'm going to use 120 by default, but there is like if you shortened your animation to only be like 90 frames because you wanted like a faster spin or something, make sure this is 90, you know? So adapt that to whatever scene you're making. And then renderable camera, we need to import a camera that we're going to use. So to create a camera, go to File, Create Camera, and let's look through that camera, right? So I'm going to press space in there, and oh, I shouldn't have closed that. I'm going to open up my outliner again, and you can just see this camera too. Name that like render camera. Boom. And then middle click, drag that into a panel, and position it somewhere where you find that you find aesthetically pleasing, right? So let's also turn on film gate so you can see exactly what that's going to crop into on that image. Like you could do like an upshot at this to make it look a little bit like more heroic. And in your Arnold render view, you can change that to camera shape 2. Oh wait, sorry. Let's close that. Render camera shape, and then let's press play, and you can see that new. Sometimes you just have to refresh that window by closing it and opening it up again. But yeah, you can see that sword there now, and it's using this camera angle, right? So if we want to render from that camera, oh, sorry, I closed my render settings. There we go. If we want to use that camera, just find it in that camera list, renderable camera. So it's going to be using that, and this is a big one. This is a big one. Everyone needs to do this. Presets HD 540. Nah. We're going to be using HD 1080. Ooh, look at that. Look at that. You see how much bigger the image is? That's because we're using an actual HD resolution for that picture, right? And you'll see that we still have a lot of fuzziness. You're like, Mike, we were going to solve that fuzziness. Why have we not solved the fuzziness, right? So that's calculated with camera AA. It defaults to, I believe, 3. And you'll notice that when I crank that up, it's immediately going to start rendering that image again. And you see how it's scanning through and making some of this less fuzzy. Look at that. Look at that. Oh, yeah. So now that's going to be a lot more quality. And make sure you do, make sure you have 4 samples on, or like 3 samples on all of your lights in your scene, right? You don't want to go too much in one of those categories because this camera AA multiplies on top of that light samples as well. But upping the samples and keeping this at 3 seems to produce some decent results. I'd say that this could maybe go a bit higher because I'm looking at this, I'm getting a little bit of fuzziness in there. There's a lot better videos about that subject, about decreasing render times. But something that we need to just look at right now is how long this render took, right? So if I shrink that window down, boom, 21 seconds. 21 seconds for that frame. So let's whip out a calculator. And I have 120 frames in the scene. So 120 times 24, 2,080 seconds, right? Let's divide that by 60. Boom. 48 minutes. So that's going to take just shy of an hour to render out this scene with those current settings, right? So just make sure you do that math before you start it up. But yeah, so once your render looks good, then we need to actually make it animate, right? So I'm going to close that renderer down so it doesn't slow everything. If you're rendering a bunch of different objects, I find it most useful to just do Control G, and then that's going to create a new group. And you can adjust that group's pivot point to be wherever you want. I'm going to go back into another camera. I'm going to go into my perspective just to get this. So if you hold D, you can move that pivot point, right, of that new group, and that group contains all of those mesh objects that you're going to render, right? So now you can animate this group, and it's going to push all of those along with it. So I'm going to press S to set a key at frame 1. Then I'm going to drag all the way to the end of my timeline, and I'm going to, in rotate Y, type 360, boom. There you go. And then made another key right there, right? So now it's going to be rotating and doing a complete 360 throughout that, right? And that's perfect. And if you open up your Arnold render view, it's going to be chugging because it's rendering out that. It's trying to render it in real time, but you can play that and see what it looks like. But it's not going to be accurate, right? And because your resulting render is going to be a lot smoother because you're going to render out each frame, right? So we have everything else set up, right? We have our camera, we have our HD 1080, we have the frame range that we're using, we have frame animation extension, we have the image format, and make sure that it says render using Arnold renderer. Otherwise, like if you try my software, it'll probably crash when it tries to do this, right? So I'm going to file, save scene, boom, sword render, perfect. And then I'm going to start my render, right? So what we do, the way that we actually start the render up is go to render and then render sequence, right? You're going to open that up and then you say current camera, render camera. Boom. That's the one that we're going to be using. And you can designate an alternate output file location by clicking on this little folder. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to put all of these, like from a different render, I'm going to put all of these into that mesh demo materials, you know. Let's put it in, let's do a new folder, just call it images, I guess. There we go. And this is going to be my folder that I'm going to put everything into, right? So I'm going to click render sequence and close, and then it will take that amount of time that we calculated it out to be. But I'm going to do something a little bit forbidden, all right? I'm going to close this. I'm going to destroy my render settings to make it really fast just for the sake of this tutorial. I'm going to go into my Arnold renderer tab and decrease camera AA, and then I'm going to open up my open Arnold render view. I'm going to press play. And boom, took 1 second to render out that frame. Perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. It's not going to be great, but I just wanted to do that in real time so you guys can see it and make sure that it's performing the same as yours at home. So I'm going to go to render sequence. I'm going to open up those and make sure at the top here it says the correct frame range. Make sure it's the correct camera. Boom, correct file or correct folder location. And then render sequence and close. Boom. And watch what happens. Oh, it's doing every single frame, and you can see that it's rendering these out. Yours will be much slower because you're going to be using a lot more samples, a lot more camera AA value. It's going to be better quality. It's going to be HD as well. And you'll notice that the frame tick is moving up 1 frame at a time. And you'll see that if you pay attention closely, that sword is slowly rotating. It's slowly rotating. Now, if you have a character in the scene, just set those keys on the main control to get the character spinning, right? That'll be a nice way to just get the turntable effect there. Now, you'll notice that some of my normals are a little bit messed up. It's because I'm doing some little mesh mirroring for the sake of, you know, my game engine to keep it nice and light. So it might not come out super correct on some of those parts of the mesh, but, you know, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. But yeah, so this is going to keep rendering. Just watch it do its thing. And we're just over halfway done. It's still cranking through. So yeah, usually if you're doing this at home for like a longer scene, just make sure you like set up your render overnight, and then make sure your computer doesn't go to sleep. That way, like if it takes 8 hours to render out your scene, then you were sleeping the whole time, right? Your computer is doing the hard work, right? So just set that up, and then when you wake up, you'll have a nice batch of images to look at in the morning. It'll be super sick. If it failed to start the render when you clicked render sequence, that might mean that you have it might mean that you have it set to Maya software instead of Arnold Renderer, and like the main render settings over here, it would say Maya software on that render panel. I'm not going to click it because usually when you start rendering, you don't really mess with the computer. It's thinking real hard. You don't want to over stress it and make it crash or something. So I usually just let it do its thing. And there we go. All right. So that finished the render out. Now let me show you how to just get that into Premiere. So this is the old like demo that I was doing just to when I messed up the recording. And you're gonna go to File, New Project, and just make a new project, and it'll be great. And then right-click in your media browser and import. I believe you can go to File, Import as well. Boom, boom, right there. And you're gonna find that folder that you were outputting all of those images into, right? So you'll see, boom, this is the one that I specified earlier in the video, and it's very important. Make sure that you have image sequence labeled, and make sure you don't have any weird numbers or characters in your file name. So notice how it took my file name and then it put the like 10001, 10002 after it. That way, this little click image sequence, this little image sequence button, make sure that that's enabled. That way, it's going to bring them in as a video, right? So now when you bring that in, instead of bringing in each individual image and like lining it up yourself, the program will do that for you. There you go. So there's my turning piece, and only render out one spin, right? There's no reason to render out a bunch, right? Because I can just copy that clip, and let's make sure that it's looking nice. Yeah. And then you can just paste that clip in there, right? So I'm just going to do Control C, Control V, Control V. I just pasted that a couple times in there, right? Let's look at it now. And you can see how noisy it is with those low render settings. But yeah, there you go. Look at that. Look at that. Also notice that this frame rate is a little bit fast. You can go to Modify and Interpret Footage and assume this frame rate 24 FPS. Boom. And it'll get it to be that round 5 seconds that we did, right? So let's drag that into here, and let's do keep existing settings. Boom. So now that's going to be at our actual speed in there. All right. Let's make sure you do that. And yeah, just copy that, paste that a couple times, and fill out your approximately 30 seconds of 3D animation reel, right? Put your name at the beginning. I usually do new item, black video. There we go. And I'll drag that into my timeline. And then on that, I will apply, in my effects, I will apply text, simple text. And you can drag it, I believe, directly on there. Yeah, perfect. And then let's adjust the position in our effects menu, effects controls. And scale, wait a minute, let's see, size, wow, there we go. Edit text, let's just say art 426, Mikey boy, sure. There we go. Use your actual name, and there we go. That's how we do it. If you want it to like ease on and off, you can drag in another black video underneath it, and then just in this layer setup, and you can just control the opacity. So like right here, you can make it a keyable attribute, and let's make that 0. And let's go a little bit further in the video. Let's make that 1. Boom. Let's make another key by setting it right there, and let's go 0 again. And then we could key this one too, so it would turn off that one's opacity as well. Oh, there we go. So now we're gonna get a nice little art426, and then it just fades off into existence right there, right? So that's gonna be great. Get a little end card too, put some music on it, make sure it's copyright free, and then go to File, Export Media, and you are almost done. Make sure your export settings are correct. You really want format H.264. H.264. That's gonna be the only way you'll be able to send it to me. Otherwise, it's probably gonna be like 2 gigabytes large, and you'll be like, I can't email this to you, you know? So once you do that, H.264, and then export, and then you are done. Congratulations. All right. Thanks for watching this tutorial with me. Have a good one.